Hi, everyone. In our last Chrysalis online session, we spoke about territory acknowledgements, the practice of deepening in relationship with the land, and what the word territory even means when we say it as descendants of European settlers, particularly the difference between colonial and capitalist ideas of territory and property and ownership of land, wherein the land is conceived of as an object or a thing that can be owned. And we contrasted that with perspectives held by many indigenous cultures, both in these lands as well as in some of our own ancestral European cultures. For example, traditional Gaelic culture, wherein the land is held to be a living being with whom we are in intimate reciprocal relationship. And from this perspective, the land fundamentally can't be owned, as it and the innumerable other than human beings that are also living in reciprocal relationship with the land, well, they also have beingness and sovereignty in and of themselves. We also talked a little bit about the practice of territory acknowledgements. And I wanted to say a few more things, so I started writing an email, and I kept writing and writing. So after about 4 pages, I realized it was way too much to ask anybody to read. So I thought I'd just try to record it so you can just watch it. And I went back through what I wrote to ensure that I was being true to our Chrysalis core practice. I'm using me and I rather than you or they or we. I want to be clear that what I'm about to say is just my view, and that my view continues to develop and grow as I learn and grow. And this is just where I am today. In our online session together, I was introducing the practice of offering territory acknowledgement, and how, as I understand it through teachings that I've received, when I offer a territory acknowledgement, that it's best done spontaneously from my own unique heart, rather than using some canned or pre-made or scripted thing that I read from a page. Sometimes that it might even be written by someone else that I might assume knows how to do it right. Often because I'm afraid that I'll suffer the public shame and embarrassment of doing it wrong. And I'm afraid that I'll inadvertently cause even more harm that I'm trying to fix. And because it's a practice that's new to me, and I'm afraid that it will be radiantly clear to everybody that although I'm the one that's been asked to speak, in reality, I don't have any idea of what I'm doing. So, in my own personal journey, I've come to recognize, to really see territory acknowledgement as an incredibly powerful way to engage in the practice of what we call truth and reconciliation. It's really exceptional practice. I think of it as a bit deceptive on its surface because of its seeming simplicity, and also in its effectiveness as a way or as an environment for learning. And what I mean is that if I'm coming from a place where I'm rooted or I'm stuck, if I'm coming from that sort of colonial, capitalist, materialist perspective, on the surface, it can seem like a totally superficial act. In practice, though, even if I offer a territory acknowledgement from a surface perspective, it begins to plant seeds that create a massive cognitive dissonance that I really believe is felt at a core level. They're seeds that begin to catalyze change inside of me. So let me explain what I mean. So on the surface, I'm asked to say a few short words at the beginning of some event about the place, the territory, that we've gathered for the event and its people. But for my territory acknowledgement to be alive, I must speak words that acknowledge the truth. And the truth that even from my rooted colonial materialist perspective, based on the laws, the legal policy, and the documents that were put into place to enforce the supremacy of my perspective, this place where I'm standing has been, and in many cases, if not most cases, still is the legal territory of the first peoples of this place. So the first component that I need to acknowledge, at the very least within myself, is that from the very beginning, from the moment that these ownership and property ideas were imposed by my settler ancestors, these agreements have been broken. Where my house was built, where the road is, where the shops and the town were built, and even how the materials and resources were acquired to do all of those things, all of it constitutes a massive breach of contract. The premise, the very premise of these contracts, the justification that was used for imposing these ideas of ownership were that they were more just, they were more civilized than the so-called primitive and unsophisticated ways of understanding and relating to land and place that have been and are still upheld by indigenous peoples since a time before time. Yet here I am, a couple of 100 years later, and I'm living a life that was entirely built upon the idea of this property view of relationship with land and place, object view. But it's also based on the reality that these contracts, these laws and agreements, well, they were being broken before the ink they were written in was even dry. I was born into a way of life that's completely dependent on continuing to violate these agreements. I was born into a way of life that I recognize is completely dependent on continuing to cause harm to this beautiful earth and to every being in it. And it continues to be particularly brutal to indigenous peoples all over the world. Now, I don't personally cut down a tree every day to build with or to burn for fuel. And I don't personally kill an animal every day to eat it. And I don't even drive my car every day and pollute the air. But every single day, I wake up in my bed. I wake up in a place and I call it my home. But according to the worldview of my own colonial ancestors on property rights and ownerships, according to the laws and contracts that they themselves established, and according to my own beliefs in fundamental human rights, this is undeniably stolen land. And that's the truth of the matter. And this truth puts me in a very uncomfortable situation. You see, I like to think of myself as honest. I like to think of myself as kind. I like to believe that I wouldn't cause harm to anyone. And I realize that that belief, that image of myself, stands in stark contrast with the facts of my situation that I've just described. Facts that for most of my life have been really easy for me to ignore. Facts that layer upon layer of colonial systems have and really continue to work very hard to suppress through misinformation and distraction. They're facts that really become impossible to avoid or deny for anyone who genuinely makes an effort to learn and engage with the practice of offering territory acknowledgements. So for me, truth and reconciliation is a process, but it's not like a mechanical process. It's a natural process. It's just like the growing of a tree, or the healing of a wound, or the development of a child. In the industrial, mechanical, technology-driven world that I live in, I'm always looking for ways to skip steps, to find efficiencies, to jump to the end results. And with mechanical processes and technologies, sometimes that works, but not with natural processes. A tree can't skip a step in becoming an ancient giant. A body can't skip a step in healing a bruise or a cut. Honestly, I don't even really believe that you can skip steps at all, even with machines. It's just that machines process at speeds that are natural for machines, which can seem to us as humans so impossibly fast that we think they must be skipping steps. The growth process of a tree happens at a natural speed for a tree. Healing processes in a body happen at the speed that's natural for the body. The process of human relational healing happens at a speed that's natural for human beings. I'm not a machine. I can't skip steps, and I can't jump to the end. And I can see for myself that the first step in truth and reconciliation is truth. And truth can be uncomfortable, especially when truth conflicts with an idea or a perspective that I've used as the foundation upon which I've built my entire belief of who I am, my identity, what kind of person I believe I am. I'm a kind and loving person. I'm a decent person. I'm a good person. That's what I believe. That's my personal truth. It feels like truth to me. So here I have two separate truths. And between them, there's a gaping vortex of discomfort. For me to step sincerely into a practice of offering territorial acknowledgement is to willingly step into that vortex. And for me, it's a very hard place to be. How can there be two truths? How can my heart and mind hold the space where two seemingly irreconcilable truths exist? And sometimes I feel like there can't be two truths at the same time. I might decide that one of those must definitely be untrue. I might decide that the whole story of colonialism is a big fat lie, that it's a fabrication, that First Nation peoples and allies, they must all just be making it up, or at the very least, exaggerating. And if I decide to go that way, well, I'm going to step back. I'm going to avoid, and I might even revile any kind of efforts towards reconciliation. Or I might go the other way. And I might decide that the story that I'm a kind, loving, decent person is a lie. I know that colonialism is true. Therefore, I can't be a good person at all. I've seen other people do this too. And if I take that view, once again, I'm going to step back. I'm going to feel ashamed, and I'm going to feel ridden with guilt, and I'm going to avoid any efforts towards reconciliation so that I can go off and revile myself. And I really believe that the real power of territory acknowledgement practice is found in the simple fact that both of these truths are absolutely true. And the transformative opportunity of territory acknowledgement arises when I find the courage to step into the space that's made between two truths. On one side, the facts, the details, the realities of the colonial structures that were imposed and continue to cause damage in an ongoing way into the present day are true. When I deeply accept this truth, it's like I'm securing one end of a weaving loom. That end becomes rock solid because the truth goes so deep. And in order to secure the other end of the loom, well, that's tricky. Because in order for me to do that, I'll have to look deep inside, really deep inside. I've got to unflinchingly examine who I am in the light of truth. I've got to purify my heart in the heat of truth so that I can know what's in there. Right at the core of who I am, I need to know that it's kindness. I need to know that it's honesty. I need to know that at my very core is love. Because love is the only thing strong enough to secure this end of the loom. And in this practice of reconciliation that can begin with territory acknowledgement, I have to be willing to stretch out the fabric that's woven between these two ends, these two truths, and really see it for what it is. A complete mess. And when I see that, I might want to throw my hands up and just run away. I feel like it's too much. When I see it, I might feel like I need to fix it myself. That I need to jump in like the great white hero and save the day. That I might even try. But if I try to do that, in really short order, I'm going to realize that it's way too big. It's way too complex for me to do that alone. I'll start to understand that this twisted fabric is not even something that I can save, nor do I want to. It might start to dawn on me that the only thing that I can do is just to get started. Started deconstructing it, picking it apart, row by row, untangling one knot at a time. It might feel like an impossible job. And in some ways, maybe it is. But once I see that fabric fully stretched out in all of its brutal complexity, when it's anchored between truth and love, I'll realize that there's nothing more important to do than to get started. There's nowhere else more important for me to be than standing at that loom unraveling. I accept that I won't see it completely unraveled in my lifetime. This demented fabric took far too long to make for it to come apart quickly or easily. But I've got to commit to getting started anyway. There's nothing else that's more worth doing. And once I start, Once I take hold of the first knot, I realize that I'm not working alone. There are many hands on the loom, many hands working to untangle and untwist and untie this mess. And they're the hands of people who have chosen to stand in that uncomfortable space that's stretched between truth and love. And I can't think of any better people to work with than that. When I was a kid, I always wanted to learn how to fix things like my dad. TVs and washing machines and cars, my dad could fix almost anything. When I'd ask to help, he'd often hand me a screwdriver and something that was broken, like a toaster or a TV remote. He'd tell me to start by getting really good at taking things apart. I learned a lot by taking things apart. I learned that if I take broken or damaged things apart in an intentional way, I get a deeper understanding of what went wrong in the first place. I learned that the skills I developed by carefully taking things apart, they're not different than the skills I need to start creating new things, beautiful things. It seems clear to me that something new needs to be created in that space between truth and love. And I have to admit that I have no idea what that is. And right now, I don't think it's time for me to worry about that. That seems like a later step, and I know that I can't skip steps. Maybe my children's generation, or maybe their children's generation, will be the ones who will be able to collaborate in reciprocal harmony with the first peoples of this land to weave something new, something beautiful. Just weaving back and forth in balance. I hope so. And I know that in order for that to happen, I need to start now. Today, every day. I need to step into that uncomfortable space and join in the great unraveling. And I will. And that's my commitment to just get started today.